Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast. Whether you are a sales professional, not in sales, but interested in helping people solve problems, or a founder, CEO who is looking to grow your business, you'll find practical tools, stories, and experience you can apply to your role. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and with me is Mike Simmons, the founder of Catalyst Sale. Hello, Mike.
Hello, Jody.
Mike, I recently watched a video that you shared with me, and it's you and Dan Tyre, previous guest on the show. Dan's from HubSpot, and he asked you some great questions. And in those questions, you talked about the 3 common mistakes people make in sales. And I thought, what a great episode. That would be a great episode. But first, I want to mention Dan Tyre. He is such a fun guy.
Dan is an amazing guy and a lot of fun and very active in the HubSpot community locally here in Phoenix. And I think if we go back to the first recording we did with him, he was employee number 6 over at HubSpot. So we'll link to previous episodes with him. He recently authored The Inbound Organization with Todd Hockenberry. I'm maybe mispronouncing Todd's last name, but yeah, Dan's a great guy, good friend, and has been a great guest on the podcast.
Okay, so let's look at what you told him, the 3 common mistakes people make in sales.
Yeah, so the first one, this happens over and over again, and it's amazing to see how many times this pattern occurs. But, we as founders, we as people, as sales professionals who want to help people solve problems, for whatever reason, we tend to focus more on the solution than we do on empathizing with the customer relative to their problem and stating things in the terms of what the customer feels and sees relative to that problem. For whatever reason, we like to talk about the solution, and we just go to the solution, and we talk about features and benefits and functionality and maybe even why we developed this thing, but we forget that it's all about the customer.
It's all about the customer. It's so true. I just want to mention for a moment, Mike, just in case, sometimes you make a plan and things come up. Like we had this plan to record a podcast. I've got a neighbor mowing the yard. I've got a kid that is so reluctant to practice his violin until we're recording a podcast, and then he practices his violin. So perhaps you hear none of that, but it's just one of those things worth mentioning that, sometimes you make a plan and things come up and you just have to deal with it and keep rolling on.
Yeah, you've got to adapt. You've got to iterate on it. I mean, so think about it. We all come up with these plans that we have around how a customer is going to use this solution. And we try to tell ourselves this story about how the customer goes through their decision-making process. The customer discovers the solution. They test the solution. Maybe they look at a demo, and then all of a sudden they make a decision and implement inside their organization. And that all looks good on paper. But we forget to ask the customer how they go through that process. We forget to take the time and walk through that decision-making process, looking at the world through their lens or walking through the world wearing their shoes. And I know we've talked before about empathy, and yet we still continue to miss on this, which is empathizing with the customer, being able to look at the problem through the lens that they have and go through that journey, that decision-making process that they go through. And lately you're seeing me post more and more information around this and what is becoming a more in vogue term of revenue operations. And that's that transition between the customer realizing I've got a problem. It might be that I'm hungry. It might be that I'm struggling with forecasting accurately. It might be that I think there's another way to grow the business and I've not yet figured that piece out. But there's this period where they establish or identify that they've got a problem, realize that they've got a problem. And then at the far end of success, there's this period where they are singing your praises from the rooftop. They're cheering you on. They're becoming a catalyst for new business to come into your organization because they're making recommendations and they're referring you into other organizations that they've either worked with or that they know people work for who are struggling with the same problem. And there's this huge journey that they go through between, hey, I've got a problem. I banged my head on the wall or on the door and I've got a headache, to, wow, I've got a solution and it's amazing what Advil can do do for me or what a leave can do for me. And we don't take the time, for whatever reason, to design our interactions with the customer based on an understanding of how they go through that decision-making process. And Gartner's done some really good work around this, around buyer enablement. That's another term that's out there in documenting how the buyer goes through the journey. I think the challenge with a lot of this stuff is it becomes marketing jargon and becomes another crutch for people to lean on. But if you take a couple of steps back and realize, if I know my customer and I know my business, I shouldn't fear my ability to be successful. And that's a butchering of a Sun Tzu quote, and we'll have the quote in the show notes. But I think a common mistake that happens here, as I'm kind of taking this off on a tangent, but a common mistake that happens here is we focus so much more on the solution and feature, functionality, benefit, and we forget that there's another side of the equation, the person who actually makes the buying decision, and they're going through this journey on their side. They, whether it's a problem they've realized or a problem they've not realized yet.
And that part is so important to remember, because when we have a product or a service, we know so much about it and we know what it does. We know how it can help people. Hopefully, if you're selling it, you really believe in it. And we get so focused on that and forget there is someone on the other side making what often is a tough decision that sometimes involves research. Sometimes they're in over their head. Sometimes they have a tight budget. There's a lot of things going on, and it's so easy to forget that.
Definitely.
Okay, so what is our next common mistake people make in sales?
This common mistake is related to the first one. And we've had Donald Miller on the podcast. And we also have had JJ Peterson on the podcast, and both of them work for Storybrand. And if you're not familiar with the SB7 framework, listen to episode 65 and episode 105 of the Catalyst Sale podcast. You can also find the Storybrand podcast. We'll include links to that, to Storybrand's podcast. The core challenge here is everybody, the sales rep, the founder of the business, the head of the organization, tries to be the hero in the story. And they forget that a more powerful character here is the guide. And the hero in the story is your customer who's running into this problem. So this is different than talking about the solution from the perspective of the problem the customer's having. This is focused more on playing a given role in the scenario. And the common mistake that early career sales professionals make, founders who are passionate about the solution that they're delivering to the market, is they try to portray themselves or present themselves as the hero in the story. If they take a step back and let the customer be the hero and they operate as the guide, the level of success will increase, or your level of success will increase significantly.
This is one of my favorite things to talk about, and I often will reflect back on my time as a park ranger when we're talking about this, because there's two ways to look at being a park ranger. Mike, I know you spend time in parks, and you don't view the park ranger the first way, but some park rangers do, where we're the hero. We're wearing the iconic flat hat. We're wearing a badge. We're in uniform. It's a very heroic position. But if you really want to serve people, you just have to remember Mike Simmons is in the park on an adventure with his family. That's his story. And the park ranger, even if we do something really big for you, that's just a piece of your story. And that's the same role the salesperson plays. You don't come in and save the day. You just help out on their bigger adventure.
Yeah, be a catalyst, right? Be a catalyst that helps them with their success, that helps them navigate the challenges that they're going to run into. You've got all of this experience. You know, as a park ranger, you're in the park every day. You see, you know where things are, if something is out of place, areas to avoid if a storm is coming in. The person who comes up like me with my Jeep, who thinks I can go anywhere and get out of anything, I could get myself into a load of trouble if I don't take the advice of the guide before, as I enter into that park, and who can help me navigate those challenges that I'm running into. And if I can navigate those challenges and get through them, then I look like the hero in the family as we're driving through the park and not getting stuck in a roadside rut as I once did in the great town of Prescott in the middle of the winter.
And that That should be the job of a park ranger, is to make Mike Simmons look like a hero. And the job in sales, your role in sales, is to make the buyer look like the hero, make the other business look like the hero, because they are in their story. So that's number 2. What's the third common mistake, Mike?
So the third common mistake, and this gets into a number of the tools that are out there. And if you're a marketer, you tend to look at buyer journey or customer decision-making process. If you're a sales ops person, you tend to look at your own sales process. If you're a sales rep, you might look at things in the way that you go about doing your business. I think from a operations perspective or a revenue operations perspective, one of the most common mistakes that organizations make is they try to have one solution fit all 3 of those challenges. And the reality is each of those challenges, understanding the buyer journey and that customer decision-making process versus using something like a sales process to help with forecasting and create a level of predictability in your business, to the organization approach, which is how you actually execute, how you do the work, how you deliver to your customer, versus the work that your sales reps do as unique individuals inside their organization. Those are all different paths. And if you try to solve for each of them using the same lens, you're going to create some risk that's not necessary for the organization. And to be really direct around this, you'll have some organizations who will create their own internal sales process based on the way that they think a customer will buy. Well, there's a couple of things there. One, they think that's how the customer buys. 2, if you work with enough customers in your organization, you'll realize there's some distinctions between how certain customers buy. There might be similar patterns, but there are some distinctions between how they buy inside a smaller organization versus a larger organization, or if they're buying for an individual team versus buying for the entire enterprise. And if you try to design your sales process based on all of those, you'll end up having multiple sales processes inside your organization. And then it'll be really difficult for you to forecast revenue inside those organizations. It'll become really difficult for you to forecast where the growth is going to come from inside those organizations. So use the right tool for the right problem inside your organization and realize that there are different perspectives that are necessary in order to look at each of these problems.
All right. This is good. I'm glad we were able to get this into an episode. After I saw you and Dan talk about this, I just knew this is one of those things that we've got to get out there more and have Mike talk about it. And we want you to join in the conversation about this. If you have comments, if you have questions, if you want Mike to go deeper, just reach out. Mike, how can they get in touch?
The best way to get in touch is to Simmons_M on Twitter, or Mike Simmons at Catalyst Sale on LinkedIn, or catalystsale.com and our live chat. Those are 3 distinct ways to get in touch. And the call to action that I'd like to hear feedback from folks on is, how are you thinking about revenue operations inside your organization? And do you see the distinction between the customer decision-making process, that journey that they go on, the distinction between your internal sales process and how you actually execute? So sales process from a forecasting perspective, organization approach from an execution standpoint, and the way that your sales reps go about doing their work on a day in, day out basis. And how are you overcoming those challenges? I'd love to hear more from the group.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mike Simmons, and thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast.